Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Dr. Christopher Brooks, who's here to share with us his new book, Tales of Koehler Hollow, an African-American family in rural Appalachia. Dr. Christopher Brooks is a professor of anthropology at Virginia Commonwealth University. He has produced numerous best-selling, award-winning publications focused on the African continent and diasporan experience. Dr. Brooks is an internationally recognized biographer who has authored a series of books exploring the HIV pandemic in Africa and America. His most recent book in this series that we'll be touching on today is Dual Pandemics, HIV and the Coronavirus in Several Kenyan Communities. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Christopher Brooks.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate your having me on.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to discuss this book. I mean, I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this?
Well, I met Naomi Hodge Muse, Mrs. Hodge Muse, through a mutual friend back in 2012. And she began telling me bits and pieces about her family history and like vignettes of this person and her family background and her great-great-grandmother, Amy Finney, who had been enslaved, and her grandmother and this person and what have you. And this started out to be a loosely connected group of 50 or so vignettes, but somehow that formula didn't work. And so I kept working with it. So it went through several iterations before it became what is today Tales of Koehler Hollow.
When we talk about Amy's journey, what significance did that have in the writing of this book?
It was kind of spiritual in some ways. Naomi took me to Mountaintop Cemetery, and this is a cemetery that has been long abandoned. And last known burial there was her grandmother, Mama Rosie. And it dated from the late 1870s. So it was African American. And there were some stones, like brick-sized stones there, and I was aware of the history surrounding that. That's how sometimes formerly enslaved people were interment sites were marked. So I saw that. But then there were also proper markers there as well. Well, she took me to Amy's marker, and just somehow there was something otherworldly about that there was a responsibility that I felt that I had. And then the work took on a direction that it hadn't prior to that. So it was really Amy's story, but it's important for me to say the most important character in this book, particularly with regard to preserving those tales, would have been Amy's grandmother, Grandma Dolly.
Please share with us about Grandma Dolly. What a remarkable person she was.
Yes, Dolly Finney was by any definition a genius. She had a photographic memory. She also had the ability to cite Paul Laurence Dunbar, Shakespeare classics, the To Be or Not to Be, which she somehow knew by heart. And at the same time, she was a tragic figure in that time and in that era, African Americans were educated only up to the 7th grade. And then if you wanted to go to complete high school, you had to pay for it. Well, Grandma Dolly's father, Papa, or George Washington Finney, didn't have the means for that. So she, like many other African American women, became a domestic. And she excelled at it because she could command a certain price for it. But when I look back on that, she could have easily been an attorney or a judge or any number of things just based on her ability to acquire information and to remember it. And she is the one who passed on those stories to Naomi, who then passed them on to me as we began this work.
What a remarkable mind. And for someone like that to have such a great memory to be able to pass on that family legacy. I mean, how important is that?
Yes.
So, how do these two very strong women continue to influence the family's legacy today, even in terms of the land?
Interesting, but those weren't the only two strong women in that family. There were a number of them. Um, there was Naomi's aunt Woodsy, who, although the family was very religious, Woodsy was the youngest of George Washington Finney's children, and she would be defiant. She would wear culottes, and she would smoke and drink. And so she was a joie de vivre, if you will, when her father was expecting her to be a model of Christian humility, etc. But Woodsy also used one of the houses on that property as a drinking place. So that's just one example. There was also Naomi's mother, Doretha, not Doretha, but Doretha, which is how they pronounced it, who had her own situations, strong in certain instances, vulnerable in others. And then there was Naomi's great grandmother, Mama Rosie, who was the wife of George Washington Finney. All of them played a role, but it was Grandma Dolly who really played a major role in helping to shape who Naomi Hodge Muse, yet another generation of strong women coming from that family, into the woman she would become.
Wow. That is just it's just remarkable coming from such a like a lineage of just strong women, and I think most people don't realize, like, during that time in history, I mean, it was difficult for women, and especially women of color, to do anything. I mean, you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about the education, I mean, that's just a small portion. It's not like they had lots of career paths to take.
Yes, that's correct. And even there is a concept in the Old Testament, and I guess it would be in the Torah as well, called the kinsman redeemer. And the kinsman redeemer was the typically a man in Jewish tradition, or but it found its way into the Old Testament as well. Typically a man who was the spokesperson for the family. He was typically the person who got family members out of trouble, or who cleared up debts, or assisted in some other way or another. Well, that's the role that Naomi Hodge Muse has played in this family, and not the least of which was, again, her commitment to seeing her family's story told.
What were some of the interesting things that you discovered while you were doing this research with this family?
There was a story of Naomi's stepfather, William Estes Jr., but he was commonly known as Poke Chop, not pork chop, but poke chop. Okay, and so he was a hellion. He was in the U.S. military during World War II. He was a gunner, and some of the escapades surrounding him were just really incredible. But Naomi loved him as a father, and the bond between them was a very strong one, you know. And she really elaborates on it when he died. That what that experience was like, taking him to Mayberry, West Virginia, where he was laid to rest. There was also her uncle, Sonny Boy, James Alfred Finney, who was really a wonderful individual. They adored him. He was loved by his grandfather, Papa or George Washington Finney, his grandmother, and it was Grandma Dolly's son. And when he died, it sent the whole family into a tailspin, but particularly Grandma Dolly, because she really treasured this young man. And in the background of that is he was a young man was the Martinsville 7 case, that infamous case or miscarriage of justice, where these 7 young men and one who was in his 30s were put to death, executed for the sexual assault of a white woman back in the late 1940s.
So you talk about that impact of that case on the family. How did they
Yes.
move forward?
Well, Naomi's uncle, Sonny Boy, knew, in fact, a few of those young men who were put on trial for that. It was almost as if the entire African American community of that period was in some way put at fault or to blame. And so when Sonny Boy was able to be recruited or drafted by the U.S. Army, his grandfather, George Washington Finney, felt that that was kind of getting him out of that area. That would, in fact, be a good thing to have him away from all of that.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Christopher Brooks in regards to his new book, Tales of Koehler Hollow. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Mary Ann. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Christopher Brooks, who's sharing with us his 2 new books, Tales of Koehler Hollow and Dual Pandemics. Before we went for break, we were talking about James Alfred Finney, who is part of the Martinsville 7's case. How did the family move forward from this?
How the family dealt with it? Well, it was at a distance. This was before Naomi was born, but certainly her mother was alive at the time. And interestingly, even as I was working on this and researching it, there were people who remembered the incident who were willing to speak about it on the condition that their names were not used. There was only one person, Miss Alberta Wilson, who passed away earlier this year at 101 years old, who spoke on the record about that. And she just gave a perspective on that you did not or would not have gotten from the official accounts, if you will. By today's standard, it was definitely a miscarriage of justice, even to the point where the former governor of Virginia exonerated those young men for that crime as a result of a lack of due process.
We're in this point in history where we're taking hard looks at things that have been injustices in the past and seeing how we can correct them and move forward.
Yes, indeed.
There's this tradition of bootlegging. I would love for you to share bootlegging with us and and how this is part of this family's journey.
Well, when we think of NASCAR and, the races and what have you, even these major racetracks, well, that tradition can be linked back to bootlegging, and the bootleggers trying to outrun the law of that period. So they would develop these souped up cars in order to race. And there was a incident that Naomi remembers when she was young with her brother and sisters. And the person's name was Shadrach. Shadrach was a person who ran the bootleg from one place to another. And Shadrach was being chased by the local sheriff. And Naomi said that they saw Shadrach speed by, and he performed what she referred to as a bootleg turn. And a bootleg turn is where someone driving a car makes a turn basically on two wheels, turns and moves back in another direction. And so the sheriff never caught up with him. And as he was going back, Shadrach tipped his hat to the kids, and they cheered him on. Now, another medicinal aspect of bootlegging, which was, we call moonshine or corn liquor, or known by a number of names, was used sometimes for medicinal purposes. Let's say Naomi grew up as an asthmatic. Sometimes her grandmother would give her a little bootleg and put something else in it, and that would help clear up her lungs. And that was before the era of Primatine mist and those kinds of things. But it had other medicinal purposes, like they might get a shot of some remedy and would have bootleg as one of the basic ingredients to clear up something or to some other ailment. And there's a section at the beginning of the book where we speak about those remedies that were used in that era.
That is really impressive, especially going back to a lot of this old, ancient, in many ways, herbalism approach to dealing with things, because, medicine wasn't around all the time. We had to come up with other things.
True. And even her great-grandmother, Grandma Amy, who had been enslaved, had her own cures for things like childbed fever. And she was known throughout the region because she delivered children, black and white, what have you. It was oftentimes someone would come and get her to go, let's say, 25 miles away to deliver a baby. And she had this cure for childbed fever and several other things as well. So she was kind of renowned, even to the point where a physician came to the holler to ask her for her cure for childbed fever. And she just looked at him and said, no, so that was it.
Good for her. We don't give away those recipes. But I mean, this book is so rich, not with just family history, but in many ways, American history.
Absolutely. When we think about Appalachia, we think about hillbillies in West Virginia and what have you. And we don't think about that African-American experience, but it was there all the time. It was also there.
So can you share with us what the African-American culture was like in Appalachia?
Yes, it was a number of things. It's a strong gun culture, hunting culture. Of course, they experienced things as rural people that those in urban areas didn't experience, but still very tied to land, tied to family issues, and that could be across the board. Still, it was a unique experience in terms of the music that would be generated, along with several other cultural practices, like the homemade remedies, the hunting. Still, there were a number of taboos there. There was Naomi's, I guess he would have been her second or third cousin, Ronnie Lee, who turned out to be LGBTQ. And although Naomi was able to get him into the military at a time in the early 1980s, even then, that came with its challenges as he eventually contracted the virus, HIV.
And things have changed so much, and thank goodness for that. We continue to grow and evolve as a people.
Thankfully.
So what do you want readers and our listeners to take away from this book?
Although Koehler Hollow is a microcosm of this African American Appalachian experience, it tells the story of family, of relationships. They were complex, they were joyous, some were sad, some were inspiring. So it really gives a panoramic view of how people lived. And I have to say that I am grateful to Amy Rath and Don Rosso of Unsung Voices Books for giving Naomi and me the chance to bring this book to life, because it was a story that was begging to be told. And I want to thank them for that as well.
I'm so grateful that all came together. It's such a phenomenal read. And I understand you have another new book that's out right now. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's called Dual Pandemics, HIV and the Coronavirus in Several Kenyan Communities. I am an anthropology professor and a HIV specialist, in that I tell and have told that story in many ways. And that is through a publisher called Linus. They are now known as Linus Learning. And I had an editor there, Jay Harath, who approached me back in 2009 about doing a book with them. And I was working with a colleague in the nursing school at my university, VCU, or Virginia Commonwealth University, who asked me if I would collaborate with him on telling the stories of these African American men with HIV. So I said, okay. So we did that book. And then I became intrigued because I wanted to know more about the virus, because I had done field work in Zimbabwe. And many of the informants who I interviewed, mostly women, had passed away. And when the way that occurred, someone passed away of a brief illness or a long illness. Well, that was a euphemism that they died of this virus. All right. So I went to South Africa, which at the time was ground zero for the virus, and did another book dealing with men and the HIV virus there. And it did very well. And I was asked by Linus to do a second edition, which I did. I did another one of women in Mali, Muslim women, and that was based on a Gates Foundation grant that I was involved in to do work in that West African country, which is mostly Muslim. That work is called The Most Vulnerable Women, HIV, and Mali. This is the most recent in that series. And so there are 5 books in that series.
That sounds like such an intriguing read. I can't wait to get my hands on that book as well. Where can our listeners and readers connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about not just these 2 books we've been talking about, but all of your other books as well?
You can also reach me at my university address, which is C.A. Brooks at vcu.edu.
Well, Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
My pleasure, and I really appreciate it, Marianne. I really thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your 2 books, Tales of Koehler Hollow and Dual Pandemics. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.